I think at this point it's probably best if I avoid the whole, planning ahead thing. It's clearly not working out for me and the way that I tend to approach content, so we're just gonna stop saying what I'm going to do and just do something. The games that tend to capture my interest at any point tend to be pretty sporadic, so this honestly is probably a better way to approach content. Rather than kind of making big and grandiose plans for the future, instead I'm just going to kind of work on content as games capture my interest when they capture my interest. Not only will this make things slightly easier for the creative side of things, but it will also make for better videos overall. The game itself will be fresh in my mind, making it easier to come up with talking points, but I'll also be in the proper headspace in general to have more meaningful discussions surrounding the game. Plus, I'm kind of just an idiot, and whenever I decide in my head that I'm going to do something, my brain immediately says to do the opposite. So instead of trying to tailor my brain around my goals for content, I'm going to tailor my goals for content around my brain. Probably should have started that way, but at least we got to this point eventually. So my brain's interest for this particular month has been the gritty, the cruel, the unforgiving, it's part of the title, the darkest dungeon. So, Darkest Dungeon, it's the most recent roguelike to kind of capture my roguelike addiction. Instead of an action game, this time it's a turn-based RPG. And there's actually a modding scene that created some anime classes, so it's a JRPG? But in all fairness, I suppose it's not technically part of the base game, so we'll call it what it is. It's a turn-based RPG. The modding scene is actually one of the main reasons that I fell in love with this game, so I will be touching on that in the next section, but for now, I'm going to give you guys a brief overview of what to expect from this game. Now, I know Darkest Dungeon is actually a pretty old game at this point. I think it came out in 2016 if I'm not mistaken. In fact, Darkest Dungeon 2 has already been announced, so that's how late to the party I really am. Hell, I might as well not have bothered waking up for it, but you know what? At least I'm here. Unlike your ancestor who literally pawns off their entire estate to use just so they don't have to deal with the problems that they caused. Essentially, the player has now inherited this large estate that is now filled with all kinds of terrible monstrosities and corruptions that the previous owner unearthed in order to find riches, I suppose. I'll be honest, I didn't pay a ton of attention to the introductions. I was just ready to go dungeon crawling and slay some beasts. With the surrounding lands now corrupted with these evil and horrific creatures, it is up to you as the estate owner to now cleanse them by recruiting all kinds of different heroes to join your cause and fight off the hordes of demons. While most of these classes are heroic like knights and clerics, most of the people who will come to your aid will just be narcissistic glory seekers in for the rudest awakening they can imagine, because these are not pleasant dungeons.
No. Paranoid. We've been clobbering people this whole time.
The shadows whisper of conspiracy.
There's kind of two core gameplay features for Darkest Dungeon. You have your estate management and your dungeon crawling. Before you go out to the perilous dungeons that are bound to drive your heroes insane, you better have yourself a well-established, well-functioning estate that can help alleviate the stress of your heroes. You'll also be needing to spend a ton of time upgrading these facilities and these various features so that your heroes will be the strongest they can be as they go out and embark on these quests. Some of these buildings will seem somewhat familiar. There's a guild hall that allows you to upgrade the abilities of your heroes, and there's also a blacksmith that allows you to upgrade weapons and armor. But as you will find out, there's also a variety of stress halls that are basically designed to reduce the stress of your heroes. Stress is one of the unique aspects of Darkest Dungeon that kind of separates it from other RPGs of a similar kind. It's basically just another resource for you to manage and keep track of, lest your party perish. Before you embark to a dungeon, you will be able to check out the quests and what rewards they offer, and then you'll also be able to buy various provisions for your travels. These include things like food, bandages, antidotes for poison, and even torches that you'll definitely want to make sure you're stocking up on before you embark on your dungeon. This game can be incredibly brutal, so you'll want to be as highly prepared as you possibly can be. Not only are the combat encounters tough in and of themselves, but there is permadeath in this game, so anytime a character dies, they are gone for good. And the game autosaves, so there's no way to save scum to bring them back. This makes almost every dungeon run intense and exhilarating, because the game is just brutal and relentless, and will punish you for any mistake that you make. This is where a lot of the stress features can really come into play. Even if you feel like you're completely destroying every enemy that shows up, your party could still go insane due to stressing out. Early on, stress management is probably one of the biggest killers, as there's not a lot of stress relief options at the player's disposal. As you progress through some of the quests though, more facilities will unlock, giving you greater options to relieve stress. Inside of the dungeon, there's still not quite a lot, but you'll eventually gain access to camping features that will kinda help out a little bit. I actually think it's quite intentional that there's not a lot of ways to heal a unit's stress. I mean, even if you're capable of staring down all these giant monstrosities, I imagine doing it every other room is probably going to take a toll on your mental health. Not to mention the plethora of traps that would be lurking around every corner, just waiting for you to stumble into them and potentially get yourself killed. Even in modern society, people are just now beginning to understand how important mental health actually is, so be kind to your heroes, or just send them into their death. Up to you. Either way, stress management is a very crucial part of Darkest Dungeon. The gameplay loop is very fun, and makes a lot of moments within each dungeon intense and exciting, even if you find yourself a little over-leveled. The fact that even some of your strongest heroes can go insane with afflictions makes it so that every encounter is something that you gotta pay close attention to. This makes each dungeon run basically its own little mini-story, with the amount of variance possible due to some of these mechanics. But these mechanics get expanded on to an even greater extent when we add in probably the best part of the entire game, the mods. So a lot of the footage that you've already seen up until this point has already included some of the mods. You might also notice that some of the combat scenarios might seem a little less challenging than what you might expect from the base game. This is because I downloaded some anime mods, and there are quite a few of them that are incredibly overtuned. A lot of them are really fun and have their own unique takes on combat and gameplay, but there are some where the stats are just way too high for what this game actually needs. Even with some of these overtuned stats though, I will say that I'm still finding myself relatively challenged by this game. It may not look it, but some of the stuff still gets pretty challenging, and this is only the easiest difficulty. With that being said though, I'm here to enjoy the game, and the mods make that extra easy to accomplish. For Darkest Dungeon, the most common mod is the class mod. The classes are basically the hero type in this game, and they're going to be the ones that you'll put into your party in order to actually go out into the dungeons. The base game already has a good number of these, and many of them are actually incredibly strong. Surprisingly enough, a couple of them are even stronger than the fan-made classes, which I think is pretty wild. But the inclusion of these fan-made classes takes the game to an even higher level. Many of these are really well designed, with some very unique takes on the gameplay. One of these was this pretty awesome combo-based class, where you could actually take multiple actions within a single round. The kicker is the more times that you swing, the less accurate that you are, and if you miss, your character takes double damage until their next turn. This adds some nice risk-reward style decision making. Do you continue swinging to try and pump out more damage, or do you hold back and play it safe? Additionally, this character must be on the front lines to activate their abilities, so there's no sitting in the back and protecting yourself. You must put yourself in harm's way. But if you get good combos going, you'll pump out the damage like no one's business. And that's just one of the classes. There's at least 100 of these or so on the Steam Workshop. The modding community has been great about making interesting and unique classes that really spice up the game. There's even classes that emulate characters from other games, such as Kratos from God of War, or Geralt from Witcher, or Link from Legend of Zelda even, and of course you've got your anime waifu classes. I love that these are something that the community has done and are able to do, because it really adds to the variance within the game and prevents it from becoming too samey, as you're always having new characters and classes to mess around with. Well, obviously not always, there's still a finite number of them, but you get the idea. There's still a lot here, and the extra classes are really fun, especially when you start trying to figure out the different types of synergies and party combinations. Now, there's obviously a lot more here than just class mods. There's obviously too much to really cover in a single video, so I'm going to point out to a couple of the ones that I personally found to be very useful. The first one is a collection of quality of life mods that really expand the inventory. One of your primary things in terms of decision making is the inventory management within a dungeon. You can only carry so much, you're constantly deciding which trinket or treasure that you'll want to take back with you, or if you want to potentially risk getting rid of one of your provisions or food in order to take more treasure. Unfortunately for the base game, this can be really frustrating because your inventory is incredibly small. On top of that, a lot of the items don't stack properly, and therefore if you want to take more of them with you, you're forced to kind of take up multiple inventory slots. The campfire wood, for example, doesn't stack at all, and if you are doing a longer dungeon that requires multiple campouts, well, you're going to have to take up 2 or more inventory slots in order to accomplish that. The mods that I downloaded help alleviate this quite a lot. One of the mods will add 2 extra inventory slots so it's not quite as restrictive, and another one will add better stackability so that things like the campfire wood will stack more than just once. This makes it so that if you're approaching a longer dungeon, you can actually take more back home with you, and you're not just forced to leave a bunch of good treasure lying around. This is also pretty helpful in alleviating a lot of the grind, because a lot of the treasures that you'll be taking back home with you are upgrade materials. In the base game, a lot of these upgrade materials don't stack with themselves very well, and so you're forced to kind of pick and choose which upgrade materials you can actually afford to take with you. Now that we got this awesome mod, you can take a lot more with you for each dungeon run, and you're not forced into a ton of nonsensical grinding. If you're playing the game on the PC, I highly recommend you at least download these inventory upgrades because I think they're pretty essential. They make the game a lot more enjoyable and a lot less frustrating. And lastly, the final mod that I will bring up is called the Sunward Isles Mod. This mod is pretty awesome. It's an entire extra zone, in many ways feeling like its own DLC. The fact that the mod creators were able to put so much quality care into designing this extra area is really awesome. They did a fantastic job, at least so far. There's a ton of unique gameplay mechanics specific to this area, which are really fascinating. Now, a lot of the core of this area is supposed to be pretty endgame, so I haven't played a lot of it, but the places that I did play felt really awesome and unique. The enemies are well thought out and were designed in a way that didn't feel like a stat stick and instead actually felt like a unique challenge that you had to overcome, kind of like their own little puzzle. These enemies tend to make you play a little more reactively based off of the decisions that they're doing, as opposed to being proactive and just kind of pumping out a ton of damage onto the most dangerous enemy. It made a lot of the encounters really fun, and I really can't wait to see what more they have once I get to the higher levels of that dungeon. It's also heavily inspired by Japanese mythology, which is a huge bonus in my book. But that's pretty much going to wrap up this video. I don't really have too much more that I want to talk about. If you're a fan of the turn-based RPGs, or maybe even turn-based strategy in a way, this game has quite a lot to offer. I've only put in about 30 hours, and that's on the easiest difficulty, and there's still a ton to go. It's also just a pretty chill game that you can kind of turn on and play if you're just looking to wind down. That is, of course, if the thought of your favorite squad perishing in a dungeon doesn't riddle you with anxiety. I tend to think of the game like a point-and-click adventure. Just a little bit more on the dark and spooky side. I think it's pretty fun, and it's definitely worth it, especially if you can find it on a sale, which is what I did. But I really enjoy it, so I intend to continue playing it, and I will probably stream it in the future. You may notice that some of the footage has my face cam in it, and that's because that was from the stream that I actually did of this game. I only played a little bit on stream, but it is something I want to do again in the future. If that's something that might interest you, feel free to follow my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/Rackhamdar. Before I sign off here, I want to know what your guys' favorite mod is down in the comments down below. I'm still constantly looking out for new mods to try out, so if it's something that sounds interesting, I might pick it up. And then of course, while you're down there, if you want to see more gaming content, you can also hit the subscribe button and that bell notification icon to see more future content from my channel. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to also leave a like down below to show your support for the channel. It greatly helps out. Without further ado, I'm going to sign off of here. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next video.